Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It is a Sunday morning here in the upper Midwest. Looks like we have a beautiful day on the horizon. We got mid 70s coming, and I like mid 70s. We've actually broken out of the drought we had last couple of seasons, and we had a pretty rainy spring, which is good news. Obviously, here in Minnesota, we're more blessed with fresh water than a lot of places. Canada, of course, my home country, has more fresh water than the rest of the world combined, but Minnesota does okay, land to 10,000 lakes, as they say, and the mighty Mississippi. But the Mississippi can be a mess sometimes. So, first things first, I'm beginning to entertain the idea of selling this building and trying to relocate the coffee shop, the jazz cafe, the vinyl archive. But I don't have the finances to do it on my own. Doing it in this small town kept my expenses down, and after my sale, if I go down this road, what I come out with will probably be enough to cover my debt and maybe help me ship at a new place somewhere, but I'm going to need a partner. And so I'm appealing to the jazz community here, and I'm willing to relocate to a better destination. And I haven't got that corner turned yet, but I'm starting to really, it's been 18 months, and the fact of the matter is the political divide in America is not getting any better. It's probably getting worse. And that means I have very little local support. And it seems like such a silly thing, because in its essence, this place is not political. I mean, there's no televisions on, there's no posters of Biden, or there's just no openly political statements being made here. And to be honest, I don't even talk politics a ton in the cafe. A, I know it's divisive. B, I'm a Canadian citizen, so I don't even vote. And I think democracy in this country is kind of fractured, broken, and pointless until we have some campaign finance reform and there's more at stake than what the elite want. Democracy's it's a token. It makes us feel like we're part of something that I'm not really part of, from my perspective, from my opinion, from how I see things. But I just find it very frustrating that the American populace is so divided, so at odds. And I mean, I'm going to call a spade here. The majority of the people on the right are very disconnected from the global community. They've become very nationalized, very prejudiced against outsiders and foreigners. And I just really recently wrote a song about the plaque on the Statue of Liberty. It's immigration was a lot of what this country was built on. But yet the polarization has become so loud and defiant. And it's always been to a degree. I mean, ask the Irish, ask the Italians, ask the blacks and Native Americans. It's always been a part of this dichotomy. The Eastern Europeans came with the left-leaning workers' union ideals of the early 20th century. It wasn't exactly received with open arms. All the different Catholic groups. I mean, there's always been, the Somali have been the last group that really have come to America in large numbers. And Minnesota is one of the places where they really centered themselves. And they've received the brunt of a lot of that. We got a lot of Pakistani, a lot of Indian people. And it's funny how these Americans think that, these people are so rude, they're so abrupt and short. And I have to always tell them, you think maybe it's because they're tired of being talked down to and condescended and treated like outsiders, and that you don't understand how offensive you come off and judgmental? And with your phony, oh, how are you doing? I mean, they see through it. They know what you're saying, and they've heard your tone, and they know. I mean, I had to tell this one local lady the other day who was, the local gas station here is run by a family from India. And she just has this perception that they're all so rude. It's like, they're not rude. They're completely wonderful people when I talk to them. But I know where their country is, and I've talked to them about India, and I've accepted them, so they trust me, and they feel like they're not being judged. They feel like they're not being cast off. And the condescension that I see off these people towards groups that are outsiders, and I know that sometimes I end up being in that group. A, being Canadian, B, being left of center in my viewpoints, C, being quite progressive in how I see things, and then D, the most political aspect about this is I play black jazz music. And I post pictures on my Facebook for the business of black jazz artists, and sometimes soul records and reggae records. And I think that's the biggest indicator to those who've never even stepped foot in here, which is way too many people in this small town. A town of 1,200 people, I would guess 2/3 of the town's never stepped foot in here. And then men over 40, that's almost all of them. The women, the younger people, they're far more open and receptive. But the men over 40, they're so pigeonholed in their beliefs now. They think how they think and how they see. They don't even step foot in here. And I think it's the notion of, oh, it's one of those liberal, hippie, minority-loving places. So, I mean, I'm still doing my best to make this work. All donations and pledges to the shop and the cafe go to helping paying the bills and the mortgage. We're doing what we can. Because it's been 18 months and we're still surviving, but the numbers aren't what I'd hoped. And I said, what's missing is that local coming in for coffee dynamic. I mean, everyone that comes in to stay for a while, which is great, but the local, I'm going to grab a cup of coffee on the way to work, has never really materialized. And it's a great cup of coffee, too. So, I mean, there's money issues. Money's tight for a lot of people. I mean, that's an aspect of it. They'd rather have their $1.50 gas station coffee than a $3 cup of gourmet, real nice Arabica beans. But, I mean, I think underlying it, there's a political divide that's really keeping this from being what it could be. And so, to people who watch this channel, if you live in Chicago, New York area, Los Angeles, San Francisco, I mean, there's infinite places, Kansas City. One of those jazz centers would be fantastic. I want to try to, any place that was receptive to it. I'd love to live in New Mexico. I love the weather in New Mexico. So, I have been talking to my ex-wife. She just graduated from 60 days in a treatment program. So she's been sober for a couple of months now. She's living now in a sober house, halfway house, trying to get back on her feet, get back to work. She still has a long ways, but she came out here and did some gardening the other day, and we're still a ways from being back in each other's arms, I think, but it's nice to see her progression. And she's been open about saying that part of her real decline was being in this small town. The mentality was so stifling. And she was from a kind of a small suburban, by small I mean 30,000 people, suburb of the Twin Cities. And when she moved into Minneapolis with me, it really changed her horizons and changed her experience. And after 3 short years in Minneapolis with me, we moved down here to the small cow country. And I've adapted and been able to absorb this much better than she did. And it just really helped her spiral. There was other things, including her depression, her addictions. There's a lot of things that spurred her departure. But this was definitely a part of it. And so possibly relocating to a more urban center. Toronto. I'd love to go back to Toronto, my hometown. I would definitely, I know the cost of living in Toronto is so high, but any urban center is going to be expensive. And so if anybody out there is interested in partnering with me, we could start a conversation. If you know anybody with a struggling coffee shop looking for a new identity, we could graft this into. I think that's the best model to look for, is a coffee shop that's kind of looking for identity, looking for some kind of fresh, new take on what they're doing. This concept is a good concept. My feedback has been outstanding. I'm pulling people from around the country, from all over the state. Most of my business comes from 30, 40 miles to 2 hours away. That's the problem. There's not the within 30-minute business that politics has kind of made that the reason why, in my opinion. Because I don't know what else it could really be. Money, I guess, is part of it. People are struggling financially. There's inflation. But, they're still going to the bar. They're still going. And the idea that, I want to drink coffee, I have sandwiches, I have soups, I have smoothies. I got all kinds of other things here besides just coffee. So I don't think it's the fact that it's a coffee shop that's keeping them out. It's that word jazz. It's that idea of, this is a weird way of saying it, but there's a mentality that I sense that's like, I don't want to catch gay by going in there. One of those liberal viewpoint people. I mean, that definitely feels like that's a big part of it. And so anybody out there who has an entrepreneurial string, some money to invest, who knows somebody who might be the perfect, I mean, I want to start that dialogue. It's not going to be an overnight thing, and I haven't really convinced myself yet that this has to be the option. But what I don't want to do is this thing to fail. And so it's better to move now while there's still money to be moved around than to have it go into the toilet and lose everything. And the archive is important. It needs to be shared with people, and maybe it being in a more urban setting would make more sense. And this was maybe a proving ground. Maybe this was like a training ground for me and learning. And I've loved it. I've loved the social aspect of it, the front of the house aspect, playing the records. I mean, there's so much of it that I've really enjoyed. It's not been a drudgery for me in any aspect aside from the stress of the money. And so what I need is a business partner. I can be the face, I can be the talker, I can be the concept, but I need a business partner to help me with the financial logistics, the bookkeeping, and obviously to invest some money into a better location. I'm going to move on. I'm going to probably mention this in most episodes going forward. Anybody who's interested, I'll put together a little package for them to see some of what's going on here. But you can see the reviews by Googling, looking on Yelp, looking on Facebook. I mean, the shop has done really well in that regard. But the frustration I have here in this small town, and don't get me wrong, I do get a lot of people of ethnicity and culture from the cities, I mean, which is an hour and 15, 20 minutes away. A lot of people go on little vacations down the river, see the Eagle Center and different state parks in the area. So a lot of people from the Twin Cities area do come through here, and this is part of their journey now. They make that stop. So I do get good conversation. However, the few locals who do come in, it's so hard having the patience to sit there listening to them talk about the same small-minded viewpoints on the world, on climate change, on religion, on nationality, on their own personal daily life, without any having broader concepts of anything's going on around in the world. That really is stifling after a while. And I try to be patient, and I try to be understanding, and I try to broaden some horizons, but some minds just don't have those doors of perception to be open, which I'm surprised by. I'm surprised how some people just don't have broader interests or can even have those interests piqued. How can a mind stay so narrow? But I don't know how they don't fall into the traps of religion and addiction and depression and alcohol. I mean, they obviously do. That's why people fall into these things. It's because they don't have a broader concept of the history of humanity and the place that we live within that concept, and how fortunate we are to live in the empire of the day and have the trickle down wealth of imperiality and cruelty and tyranny elevating our living standards. And that's a fact that I can't escape. But I mean, there's still a fortunate son dimension to that because of where I was born, I live in a rather comfortable life, more so than anyone in the history of this planet, with the warm water and the access to food and the plumbing and the things that, I mean, most people throughout history have not had these things. And the aspect of it is that it's balanced by the fact that it comes from a great tyranny, a great oppression, starting with slavery and the genocide of the Native Americans, going on through the Great Wars and the occupation of the world's resources and the toppling of regimes and governments to make those resources affordable. I mean, there's a lot of tyranny that comes with the comfort of my pillow. But I think having that perspective allows me to be thankful and to feel blessed and to feel fortunate. And I think there's also people who don't recognize it carry a great guilt and shame at times that they can't even put a finger on. I mean, I've said before, I'm a British and Dutch descent as a Canadian citizen. My parents came from England and Holland after the war. And both those countries were masters of tyranny, masters of global occupation and exploitation. And the American flag now has stood for a lot of that in a lot of places in the world for a long time. But again, it does elevate the standard of living that I get to enjoy. And I think a lot of these people in these small towns, they don't understand the cost of what freedom really is and who's paying that price. And I mean, we pay the price on some level with our tax dollars going towards weapons of war to create occupations. But I mean, we're still very lucky. We're still very blessed. I've been working a lot on my music. I have written close to 24 songs in the last 6 months. And I'm spending a lot of time trying to get that production of those songs into a nice polished state. I play keyboards, I play guitar. I also program drums and bass lines and add string parts, and I'm trying to make these songs as well polished and produced as possible. I also do some singing. I have another singer that I work with, but I spend most time here by myself trying to get these songs to sound as good as I can on my own, so that when my singer and I have another member who plays some guitar, when they show up, I want these songs to be as polished as possible, which has diminished my jazz listening time, to be honest. I still get a record or two a day, generally, sometimes not even that. And I've also been going through the Beatles stuff lately. The Beatles stuff, it's always good to go back and rehear it. And to hear the impact of James Jamerson from Motown on Paul McCartney's bass lines, aka 65, Rubber Soul, Revolver, just to hear the brilliance of composition and songwriting and the lack of self in most of those songs. The strength of the song was always the initiative, the energy that drove the songs, not the look of me. Very few Beatles moments is there someone going, look at me, I want to shine. It's always about the composition first. And it's such an interesting bottleneck, and I said that before, but almost all music before the Beatles ends up in the sound of the Beatles. And everything since the Beatles has some Beatles in it. Even if they don't recognize it, their influences were influenced by the Beatles. The Beatles is such an interesting time in history and music. And I've been going through a lot of other stuff as well, just kind of hearing, I mean, I always listen to Bob Marley. I need Marley in my life, and I love his kid Damien. I love his grandson Skip. So there's a lot of good music in the world that I kind of do enjoy that helps elevate me and my emotional condition. But I have listened to a couple good jazz records lately. This was I played the other morning. It's a 10-inch from the Storyville label out of Boston. It's by Ellis Larkin, fantastic piano player. Great cover by the great Burt Goldblatt. Beautiful intonation color-wise. You can see him there between those, what I'm guessing are sound barriers. Ellis was a fantastic piano player, a brother. Storyville label wasn't long for this world. And it was reintroduced in Denmark, I believe, in the 80s, but it's not the same company, the same management whatsoever. Ellis, the Storyville label has about 22, I think, 10 inches, maybe 18 LPs, and they kind of fold up shop. This label was brought to us by the great George Wheat, who ended up becoming more of a music concert promoter, who was responsible for Newport Jazz Festival and all that stuff. So Ween was an important figure, but this was his first label, Storyville. A lot of it was coming from his club in Boston called Storyville, where he would often record live stuff. But Larkin's a great, delicate piano player. This is mostly solo work, and he's a wonderful, intricate player with a real elegant, kind of fantastic dimension to his playing that will really be wonderful and wash over you. I also listened to this the other day, and I probably played it 4 times. It's such a great listen. Ray Brown, Soul and Energy. It's on the Concord label. I think it's from like 74 or 5. Early Concord. Do I say the year on here? I don't think I do. I think this is fairly early in the Concord chronology. Some point in the 70s. And it looks like someone autographed that. Someone autographed that. I don't know if that's Ray Brown, but... To Nancy, I don't think it's Ray Brown. Is there any of the other band members? I think that's a Gene Harris autograph. I think Gene Harris autographed that. I mean, I'll take anyone else take a closer look. That looks like it says Gene Harris. And Gene Harris, of course, was the great piano player in the Three Sounds of Blue Note fame. I'm a huge Blue Note, Three Sounds fan. I'm a huge Gene Harris fan. A wonderful, soulful Detroit-born player with a lot of blues and black gospel, and his work with the Three Sounds is some of the greatest. Easy to listen to, Blue Note, cool. I mean, it's not really cool, but it is kind of cool in a way. It's very accessible. It's very piano trio stuff. I love all those Three Sounds records. They sold pretty well for the Blue Note label when they were still an independent entity, and which makes them easier to find, kind of like the Jimmy Smith stuff. But because they're easier to find, they don't go for as much, and because they don't go for as much, people don't think they're any good. Which is, I mean, it's kind of a silly notion. Jazz records very rarely aren't great playing. And because they don't, there's so many copies still out there, and they don't go for a lot of money. A lot of them haven't been reissued, which mean a lot of the jazz consumption crowd today ignores them. But Gene Harris ends up in the 70s with Concord, with Ray Brown, and some of the other great players like Hank Jones, working on great traditional jazz still in the 70s and 80s, doing incredible stuff. And a lot of Gene Harris's work on the Concord label from the 70s and 80s. My friend Jean-Michel told me about it. It's fantastic, and I have a lot of it now. Just wonderful. If you like the Three Sounds, you'll like Gene Harris's later work. And his work with Ray Brown, they were part of a group for a while, Ray and Gene. And those records are just fantastic post-fusion trad jazz. Still playing traditional instruments, playing that acoustic sound, with all kinds of soul and blues and feel. Some of the best traditional jazz of the 70s came out on that Concord label, and Ray Brown was a big part of it. And this record, Solar Energy, is a hard record to find nowadays. It actually has been reissued, which might make some of you more interested in buying it. Crimea River on here is just wonderful. Mistreated but Undefeated Blues, Sweet Georgia Brown. I mean, the whole record's fantastic. Red Holloway shows up on tenor, who has some work at Prestige back in the 60s. Garrett King is on the drums, who I don't know much about, to be honest. Emily Remler plays the guitar. And like I said, that looks like a Gene Harris autograph. That's kind of cool. I don't think I've ever noticed that before. There's a picture of the group. Solar Energy. Again, this is a record I used to see in record stores back in the 90s for $5. And now good luck finding it for less than 50. It's become a real tough record to track down. But it's really worth it. And the production levels being from when it is, with the multi-tracking of the 70s, it's really a well-polished, well-sounding record. But it doesn't become easy listening schlock. I mean, it's not CTI with its polish and its elaborate arrangements. It's still real jazz through and through to its core. And the more arranged something becomes, the less jazzy it is. I mean, I don't want to get into this argument with people, but the more arranged something is, the less jazz it is. I'm just going to leave it at that. Composition and jazz have a strange relationship, to say the least. As Prince once said, strange relationship, yeah. But the other record I want to talk to you is about Kenny Drew, Talking and Walking with the Kenny Drew Quartet. And this is after he'd left Miles' group, who he was in Miles' quintet before Red Garland. And he quit Miles' group after Miles abandoned him on the West Coast. I've told that story numerous times. He gave Miles a good punch when he got back to New York, which is a nice little caveat. This is a fantastic record. It's on the Jazz West label out of the West Coast. And this is a Japanese pressing, and it's a very hard record to come by, original pressings of. There's a real revelatory player on this record called Joe Maini. Sounds like an Italian guy, Joe Maini. And Joe Maini plays alto, and he's just a wonderful breath of innovative fresh air. And he's really got a lot of soul and a lot of feel and a lot of push. He just knows how to play jazz. I mean, it's you're almost surprised at times that it's not a brother, because he just plays with such an elegant soul and feel, and it feels never about technical proficiency. It feels always just about expression. And you know that difference. I mean, as a listener, when someone's expressing, look how technically proficient I am, versus someone just telling you a story and speaking through feeling. I'll tell you which one I prefer. Kenny Drew is fantastic on this. Leroy Vinegar is on the bass, and Lawrence Marble's on the drums. So very much a West Coast session. And Joe Mahoney on that saxophone. He doesn't have a lot of work. I think he's on a contemporary session or two on that label, maybe a Pacific record. I mean, I've looked it up before, but it's a small body of work that he's on. But everything I've heard him on is really wonderful. My buddy Scott Baldwin's a big fan of his as well, and we've had conversations about the wonderful sound of Mahoney. Just a great player that's really overlooked and forgotten in today's jazz milieu, which is a fun word to say. I'm going to also talk real quick about a tone poet here. It's a record I've talked about before, but it's been played in the cafe a lot as of late. KB Blues is the tone poet. Wonderful record with Louis Hayes, Dougie Watkins, Horace Silver, and Hank Mobley. Mobley's from Newark, New Jersey. I think he was originally from the South, but raised in Newark. Horace Silver was, I believe, a New York, Connecticut guy, maybe New Jersey. But he's a New York area guy. And Watkins and Hayes are Detroit guys, along with Kenny Burrell, the Detroit guy. I'm a huge fan of Burrell. It's what's been playing in the background. This had a Japanese issuing in the 80s with a much different cover. This is a much better cover. It's one thing Tone Poet does really well. This has a couple alternate takes of KB Blues, DB Blues. So it's not like a full album length of material, so they put an alternate take on here. It was recorded from 57 with, of course, Van Gelder, Frank Wolf, of course, the photography, Harley and Gray are the guys behind it, as of course they always are with the Tone Poet stuff. Burrell is one of the great guitar players in jazz. And Kenny Burrell's body of work is immense. Absolutely immense. And he jumps around from label to label, never stays in one place too long, never puts his boots in concrete. You know what I mean? He's always kind of shuffling about. But just a real fantastic journey. You know, one last record I want to talk to you about was a record I played the other day numerous times. Muddy Waters, the real folk blues. And I think it's by this time he's in Chicago. Obviously, he's recording for Chess here. But there's some fun stuff on this, man. Manish Boy, I think, is on here. Screaming and Crying, Walking in the Park, Walking Blues, which, I mean, the Grateful Dead do the Walking Blues. And it was nice to hear a Muddy Waters version of that. This is fantastic stuff. And anything that you find by Muddy Waters on the Chess label is worthy of grabbing. And even these 80s repressings of these Chess records have starting to climb up in value and are worth looking for. But yeah, Kenny Burrell is always a guy you should find. His work going into the 80s is marvelous, fantastic, beautiful stuff. That Kenny Drew record with Joe Mahoney is definitely worth seeking out. The Ray Brown, definitely worth seeking out. The Ellis Larkins record is going to be a tough one to come by, that 10-inch. I think it did get a 12-inch LP coupling with another record on Storyville, so you can probably find it that way a little easier, a little more affordable. But you want the original 10-inch if you can with that cover. That Burt Goldblatt cover is just absolutely gorgeous. I think Burt Goldblatt is the best album graphic designer in jazz. And I love DSM, and I love some of the other guys, Reed Miles. I mean, Reed Miles' stuff is pretty impeccable, but I love what Burt Goldblatt did in the 50s, especially in that late 10-inch era, 53, 54, 55, into 56. What he does for Roost and for Storyville and for, I mean, all the different labels he was working for, Savoy, Emersy. It's a pretty broad stroke of labels he's doing covers for. Bethlehem, of course. Goldblatt stuff is some of the best covers and graphic design in jazz. I'm a huge fan of what he did. The Discovery label out of Hollywood, he does some covers for them. So anything with Burt Goldblatt artwork, I'll always kind of snatch it up if I can. Unfortunately, I've not been able to buy records the last 6 months. My money just hasn't allowed it. It's about just keeping the water and the power on right now. So anyway, back to that initial conversation. Anybody wants to support the channel, please, Patreon, super thanks, PayPal, whatever you want to do. It's always very much appreciated and supported. It helps keep the channel afloat, helps keep the coffee shop afloat. But if anybody wants to message me and possibly talk about a business venture in terms of relocating this shop somewhere, I'm going to entertain ideas now. Because it's been 18 months. That's a good run to see what's going to happen. And, I mean, we're surviving, but it's slim pickings. Slimmer than it should be. This town should embrace this. This town should be like, wow, this makes us unique from other small towns in the area. No towns have something like this. We should be proud of this. And I thought that would be the mentality they had. And yet, from what a lot of people tell me, these small towns don't really embrace outsiders or different whatsoever. And that's disappointing. It's just really disappointing. So anyway, that's today's episode. Hope you all are great. I'm going to work on a live thing with Stephen Bucks from South Africa and talk some geopolitics and some racial indiscretions with him coming up. Hopefully in the next few days here, we're going to have a live stream with that. So keep y'all posted and informed. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.